is navigating challenges, unlocking opportunities. My name is Khalil Cumberbatch, and I'm delighted to be here with you today. I serve as the Director of Engagement and Partnerships here at the Council on Criminal Justice and co-lead the Centering Justice Initiative alongside my colleague, Marc Levin, CCJ's Chief Policy Counsel, who is here today as well. We both are deeply committed to advancing the conversation around criminal justice reform, particularly focusing on second chance policies and reintegration of people with criminal records. Before we dive into today's conversations, I want to take a moment to briefly talk about centering justice and why we believe this initiative is so important. Centering Justice is a unique project at the Council on Criminal Justice, where we bring together voices from across the ideological spectrum to engage in thoughtful, evidence-based conversations about some of the most pressing issues facing the criminal justice system today. Our goal is to shed light on these issues rather than add noise to it. It's not just about highlighting the problems, it's about offering concrete solutions and fostering collaboration among stakeholders from all sides of the debate and the aisle, so to speak. The work we do at Centering Justice is about finding common ground on complex issues like today's topic, for example, second chance policies. These policies aim to offer individuals who have been involved in the criminal justice system an opportunity to rebuild their lives and contribute to society in a meaningful way. But as we will hear today from our panelists, there are still significant barriers that need to be addressed in both policy and in public perception. Should also say that before we get started, I want to let everyone know that today's session will include a Q&A segment toward the end of the hour. We do encourage you, of course, to participate by submitting your questions in the comment section throughout the discussion, and those questions will then reach our panelists. Marc and I obviously will be moderating not only the conversation, but the Q&A, and we'll do our best to address as many of the questions as we can that come in through the chat. Additionally, I should say that this event is being recorded, as well as a write-up summarizing the key takeaways will be available after the session. If you miss anything or want to revisit the discussion, you obviously have access to that. With that, I'll turn to Marc, who will help to frame today's topic in a more detailed way and introduce our panelists. Marc?
Well, thanks, Khalil. I think it's really appropriate that we delve into this through our Centering Justice Initiative because tackling reentry has been an area of great bipartisan success, although there's a lot more work to be done. And it's really logical why it's able to get across the ideological spectrum, because it's an opportunity to reduce crime, to families to get promoted, to get people back into the workforce, and thereby make our whole society safer and more prosperous. And really, there's been a growing leaders on both sides of the aisle. Pam Bondi spoke of the importance of reentry at her confirmation hearing to be Attorney General. And in terms of specific policies, we've also seen a lot of bipartisanship, both at the state and federal level, dealing with things like clean slate, a fair chance hiring, making sure people can get an occupational license, even though they've had a conviction that's unrelated to the duties of that job. And so we know when we reduce the government barriers or take them down to people succeeding, it really can be beneficial. Having said that, there's a lot of complex questions that we confront in terms of second chances, including the reality that for many people, they've committed multiple offenses in the past. And so we have to be realistic about that and make sure we're balancing accountability and the opportunity for people to overcome their past. And of course, in terms of reentry, we know it's not always a straight line. Sometimes people have a relapse, particularly with addiction, for example. And so the question is, how can we keep things moving forward and recognize both individuals and systems fail sometimes? And we also need to make sure that there's swift, certain, and commensurate consequences, but also positive incentives for people in systems such as probation and parole. So as we turn to hopefully our panelists here, I just wanted to say that this is a tremendous opportunity to take the next step and make sure Second Chance Month is a reality and make sure that we're both holding people accountable when they make mistakes, but also helping them succeed. So with that, I want to turn back to Khalil for our first question and introduction of our panelists.
Yeah, thank you, Marc. And I want to thank our panelists. Of course, we have Heather Rice-Minus from Prison Fellowship, We have the infamous Lewis Reed, as well as Lisa Daniels joining us for this conversation today. I should say that Marc did highlight some of the important points, and we should also start by acknowledging that there is good news. There's been progress, reports published by not only the team here at the council, but also by the Council on State Governments that say that nationally recidivism rates have come down. State data that shows in the CSG report shows that reincarceration rates were 22% lower between the years of 2018, 2019, and as compared to 2008, and 3/4 of states experienced a reduction in reincarceration. The CCJ analysis uses the most recent federal data, which shows a similar decline by 39% of people released in 2012 returned to prison within 3 years compared to 50% of individuals released in 2005. Again, a downward trend. The reason for these reductions are not obviously crystal clear, and as Marc alluded to, there is no straight line. But there are two basic possible explanations. One, either changes in behavior by those released or changes in the behavior of the criminal justice system. Our analysis found that the rearrest rate remained high for people exiting prison in 2012. The rate stood at 71%, a 6-point lower than the 77% rearrest rate in 2005. So individual behavior change is definitely contributing, along with a clear trend toward the system revoking fewer people to prison for technical violations of supervision. Of course, more data and analysis are needed to demonstrate a fuller understanding of why recidivism rates have actually fallen. With that said, I would obviously now like to turn to our three panelists and ask them some overarching questions, but I should also say that as we all have agreed, there is going to be absolutely no softball questions. Public opinion research shows that people across the political spectrum support second chances for a wide array of behavior and criminal offenses, but that support drops substantially for a third and subsequent offense. According to the most recent report from the Department of Justice, 77% of people admitted to state prison in 2014 had a mean average of 5 or more prior arrests in their criminal history, and the median number was 9 prior arrests. So how many opportunities should someone have to successfully re-enter society after incarcerations? What do policymakers and the public often misunderstand about recidivism? And how should that shape our approach to re-entry and to re-entry legislation? So first, I'll start with posing a question to Lisa, and then same question applies to you, Lewis. Given all of the data and all of the points that we tried to cover in the first 10 minutes, which obviously are a lot, how should policymakers balance hard evidence with human stories and lived experiences when designing reentry programs? Lisa, we can start with you.
First, we should not allow policymakers to design reentry programs, first and foremost. We should do that. That's the first part of, I guess, my question. Why are we actually allowing policymakers in a position to design reentry programs? The fact of the matter is that you can't separate the two. Data tells us what's happening, and lived experience tells us why it's happening. And if you're writing policy for people without including those people that it's meant to serve, then you're designing programs from a distance. You're designing the processes that are supposed to support them from a distance, and distance can often lead to harm. And so lived experience actually brings a nuance that data cannot hold. It helps us to understand what safety and success or support actually look like from the inside. And that's not anecdotal, it's evidence with context. And so what we need is both to be able to design programs that are not only effective on paper, but using a deeply divine human, a deeply divine and humane practice.
Thank you, Lisa. Lewis, same question to you. How should policymakers balance hard evidence with human stories and lived experiences when designing reentry programs?
Yeah, so for me, I'm actually thinking about that question, but I'm also thinking about something that Marc had highlighted as well. How do we hold people accountable? Where I come from, in effect, we've skipped past the holding and we've gone right into the accountability portion. When I think about what holding mean, it means to be able to have a degree of understanding of someone, of their experiences, of their biopsychosocial assessment, what contributed to that individual having 9 arrests, for instance. When I think about somebody who has 9 arrests, if you look at my criminal history, it reads like the Magna Carta, so to speak, right? But when I think about that, if someone has 9 arrests, that's not proof that they're beyond help. In my mind, it's proof that the system has failed 9 times to be able to intervene with anything but punishment. And that's not a rap sheet, similar to what Lisa said. It's a roadmap of missed policy opportunities. And so when I think about even recidivism, number one, how are we measuring recidivism? In my mind, recidivism doesn't measure morality. I think that it measures policy failures. If we are getting more nuanced in this conversation and we look at folks who so-called recidivated, but they fall into that supervision category, well, is a technical violation technically recidivism? If folks come home to no housing, no job access, no mental health care, in more than 48,000 legal barriers and or social consequences to one criminal conviction, what are they really re-entering into? We keep sending people back to the same zip codes and expect different results. And in my mind, that's the 2025 version of what Einstein said is the definition of insanity. And so I think that when we talk policy, we have to keep designing reform-based spreadsheets, but with data without lived experience. To Lisa's point, it gives you clean graphs and it's going to talk about broken systems, but it's not going to talk about broken humanity.
Data and lived experience. Heather, I would like to pose the next question to you. What role does faith or spiritual support play in helping individuals navigate the challenges of reentry, and how can systems better partner with faith-based communities? Now, I will say, obviously, as per the numbers that we just mentioned, we have gotten better overall, and I say we as a society, but do we really have the answers on what really works, and not just a political will that's sometimes wasted, but actually the political will needed to implement what works, and they're not, and not just waste our time and energy and resources on policies that we can't scale.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I can't help but think in light of this question of the fact that I just got to celebrate as a Christian Easter this weekend, and got to think about, my Savior who was resurrected and offered me grace. And I'm so glad I serve a God that, doesn't, keep track of all of my sins and doesn't stop at 2, but offers me, multiple chances to accept his grace. And so, when I think about allowing people the opportunity to rehabilitate and to serve their debt and to come back and have a second chance, it's really not just a second chance that we should offer. We should offer a proportional penalty for the crime that's committed, but then every time we send someone back, to Lewis's point, we have to set them up for success. And that actually starts far before we send them home, right? It should start at the moment that they're entering the system. And that's where I think we miss some opportunities. I do think we've got some solutions out there that are proven to work. I mean, I can speak for, as Prison Fellowship, nation's largest Christian nonprofit serving people in prison. We have a program called the Academy. It's existed for over 25 years. The first one was actually opened in Houston, Texas. And we're super grateful the Department of Texas has studied that program along with, some of their other major programs every year. And compared to its control group, our participants in the Academy have a 54% reduction in recidivism compared to the control group. We've been able to scale this program to over 40 sites across the country, but that's only possible when departments of corrections open their doors, allow programs like ours that are volunteer run. Our programs don't accept any federal or state funds, and it's only possible through generous giving, charitable giving. And so that's a solution that can scale. There are other policies and programs across the country that I think we need to lean into. Where we see something working, let's do more of it. But then I also just want to speak briefly to the point of culture. Prison culture, as well as the culture outside. The programs that we have, I think we focus so much on just the program. The reality is, if the prison culture itself and the culture we send people back to isn't conducive to them living out that second chance, we're setting people up for failure. And so that means we have to be talking to our communities, to our churches, to our policymakers, our prison officials about building positive and healthy culture. And that prison program is only as good as the culture it sits in.
Well, thanks so much, Heather. And all of those comments were really profound, and it kind of reminds me of the fact that reentry planning should start as soon as somebody is incarcerated, and through an individualized reentry plan that keeps in mind, who their supports are going to be when they come out in terms of visitation and what their employment possibilities are, and customize their educational employment program in prison so to be relevant for them and helpful when they're released. But I wanted to kind of ask you, I know it's on top of mind these days for folks, what the impact of the Trump administration is in this area. Obviously, President Trump actually signed the first Second Chance Month proclamation in 2018. And since then, thanks in large part to Prison Fellowship, as well as others who are in this conversation today, many states, almost every state, it seems, no matter the party of the governor, has done a Second Chance Month proclamation. And so obviously, we also saw the appointment of Alice Marie Johnson as pardon czar, and now Billy Marshall, who was the head of corrections in West Virginia, has taken over the federal prison system. And he, I think, made some substantial improvements, even though, like every state, West Virginia has understaffing and problems in their prisons. He didn't always get what he wanted from the legislature, so he's probably going to be having that same challenge with Congress. But Heather, did you want to kind of start this round in terms of what you expect going forward from the Trump administration and what you'd like to see in this area?
Sure, Mark. So, obviously in the first term for President Trump, not only were there multiple Second Chance Month proclamations that he made, but also, passed the First Step Act, which was, historic bipartisan legislation that's impacted the federal system. And as a result, we've seen people come home. We've seen people become successful and contribute to their communities. And so as we look at this second term, I think the administration has been focusing on other things, the economy, immigration. And so really what will happen in terms of criminal justice reform, I think, is yet to be seen. But there is a through line there in terms of Alice Marie Johnson. To your point, Mark, I'm super excited that he has appointed her as pardon czar. I think Alice is just a shining example of what Lisa and Lewis spoke about, which is the importance of allowing people with direct experience to speak into what policies need to be implemented. And so excited for her appointment. The new BOP director is someone who we have had the pleasure of working with at Prison Fellowship at the state level. He was open to our warden exchange program, really trying to foster a positive culture in his state system. And so looking forward to seeing what he does at the federal level as well. And, at Prison Fellowship, we've worked with every administration over the years, with Congress at the state level. And so our role at Prison Fellowship is to remain hopeful and to press forward and to push for additional reforms, including making sure that the First Step Act is implemented and that federal oversight, Prison Oversight Act is implemented as well, because there's been a number of problems with the Bureau of Prisons over the years. We need greater oversight there. And so we're going to continue pushing for that and remaining hopeful.
Lewis, did you want to get it?
Yep.
Yeah, so I would be remiss if I didn't just tap into the little preacher boy that's inside of me, or wannabe preacher boy that's inside of me, I should say. 2 days after the resurrection, I know that we give Trump credit for signing, the proclamation of April being Second Chance Month, but more than 2,000 years ago, I think that it was Jesus who actually declared that there should be a second chance and/or 22nd chance, or ad infinitum, I should say, for people who have in effect missed the mark. But beyond that, going back to the above, look, let's be honest. I think that Trump signing the Second Chance Month proclamation in 2018, it was symbolic, but I also think that it was strategic. I think that it signaled that redemption doesn't belong to one party. One of the things I always say is that Republicans at their best believe in liberty, Democrats at their best believe in justice, and all of us as Americans at our best should believe in liberty and justice for all people, not just some people. And that was a door that we needed open. But in addition, I think that symbolism can't be the ceiling. I think that we need substance, and especially now. Auntie Alice, who I affectionately call Miss Alice Marie Johnson, as pardons are, I think shows that they understand the power of personal narrative, but beyond storytelling without policy teeth, it can only go so far. And I think that Billy Marshall stepping into the BOP, that's an opportunity if he brings a reentry lens to the system that still operates like freedom is the exception and not the goal. I think that that would be helpful. Last but not least, I'll just mention this as a PS. I think that when it comes to solutions, what will I like to personally see from this administration? I think that we need a federal reentry infrastructure bill. I think that we got highways for commerce. Why not for people coming home? We need to build reentry roadways, so that people have that springboard to success that Heather was talking about. Next, I think that we also need performance-based contracts for the BOP. Look, if you want to run prisons in this country, your funding should rise or fall based on how many people you set free, not by how many people you can keep locked up. And if there's something else that I could think about as well, I think that we need to be able to automate the clemency review process for long-term sentences. Don't get me started even on Clean Slate Act legislation on a federal level that in effect should expunge people's record after they have been home with no intervening arrest and or convictions, because the pardon process, whether we realize it or not, yes, the pardon process restores your rights, but it doesn't necessarily give you a clean slate and suppress your criminal history.
Thank you, Louis. Lisa, same question to you.
Nope. Louis said it. Louis said it all. I got nothing. There's nothing else to add.
Okay, well then I'll ask you this question, Lisa, and then of course the same question applies to the other panelists. There are a number of people that feel that the majority of the onus for someone's success and therefore failure once they reenter is on the individual, and not enough of that responsibility is owned or placed on systems that they're returning to, whether that be the parole supervision system, housing, you name it. Are we placing too much responsibility for reentry success on the individual and not enough on the systems?
Absolutely, positively. Going back to the question you asked early on in the intro, how many times or how many opportunities should someone have to successfully reenter society? I think that really does kind of speak to that, because the fact of the matter is that there is no number of times. This question itself partially presumes that prison teaches or positively changes people so that they should be expected to do well when they come out. And if they don't, then that's on them. But the fact of the matter is that I know all too well, and I can only imagine that you all on the panel know as well, particularly specifically Louis and possibly Heather, that prison damages people. And so every time somebody goes in, the chances for them thriving are actually reduced by the harm that they've experienced while they're in prison. And although there are people that do well and are successful upon return, they have done so, and not because of their prison experience, but despite their prison experience. And so we should probably be asking a question: how many times can a state incarcerate someone before they, the state, actually have to acknowledge that incarceration isn't working, and that there needs to be something different done? And I also think that part of that question that gets to whether people are deserving of an opportunity misses the qualitative pieces, which is what we're talking about, the qualitative pieces about whether or not they're engaged in healing, in accountability, in harm repair, and most importantly and most impactful, in community. And those are the things that happen during or in between that 1 year point, that 5 year point, that or the 20 year point where they could possibly return to incarceration. But whenever they do the work, whether they participate in the work, that segment is significant for them. And people who do those things, in my opinion, deserve to be among us without question.
Heather, do we place too much responsibility for reentry success on the individual?
I think we do. I think, it's certainly a balance. When someone commits a crime, it tears at the fabric of society. And I think, crime demands consequences. We have to have people be held accountable. But at the same time, when we only say that that person themselves needs to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, we're basically setting everybody up for failure. And so we have to not only hold systems accountable, but again, I would go back to the point of culture. It's not only the prison system that we need to hold accountable. We also need to think about our communities, our churches being places of welcome for people. There's a lot of stigma people face if you have a criminal record. We talked at my church on Second Chance Sunday just a couple weeks back about how, it can be a scarlet letter for felon. And so how do we as a church welcome people home in a way that says, you belong and we're going to support you in this. And so I think we not only need to look at government systems, but we need to look at communities, families, cultures. Are we incarcerating people so far from their family that they don't get to visit someone? Just a few months back, I got to take a family I got to know through Angel Tree Prison Fellowships program for children of the incarcerated to visit their dad in prison. It was the first time they'd seen their dad in person in 15 years. They just could not afford to go visit him out of state. And so that's the kind of policies we also need to be looking at, because it's not just government systems, that's a piece of it, but it's also how do we embed families, faith communities, and other pieces that are contributing to someone's success to set those things up well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that because, I was talking with a woman who runs prison programming, and she said the biggest difference she sees in terms of who's motivated and who ends up completing the program and succeeding on the outside is, do they have people that they think care about them, how they do, that are on the outside, as you said, family, ministers, and obviously from a spiritual connection, it'd also be a belief that God cares about them as well. And so, and I think a corollary to what you said in terms of it's both the individual and society, and Lewis, you alluded to that when you talked about kind of the $1 million block idea. Look at some of the challenges and lack of opportunity there in some of the areas that folks come back to. But another corollary is that's not just the criminal justice system, or even mainly, it deals with, for example, housing costs. People can't afford a place to live, or places don't want to rent to someone who has a record. So I'm wondering if perhaps all of you, there's been a lot of discussion recently on, the abundance, for example, which in some ways is maybe some folks on the left coming to see some value in what Wright have said about for many years in terms of whether it's zoning or other restrictions that prevent people from finding a place to live, for example. And I guess ultimately, from my perspective, it's the people with a criminal record, people who have the fewest resources, someone leaving prison with $25, that kind of get most likely to get the short end of the stick when you have a scarcity of resources. So I'm just wondering if there are things you think we need to focus on in terms of other systems, as well as nonprofits and people helping people through churches, as we, as much as we focus on government programs for a specific person.
Mark, I did 14 years.
Yeah.
14 years in federal prison. I've been home approximately 10 years now, passed a bunch of bills with you and other people over at CCJ, et cetera. And just relatively recently, when I was introduced to give a keynote speech for a very relatively large crowd, someone introduced me as a returning citizen. And one of the things that I shared in my opening remarks is, how long do I have to be home before I'm not a returning citizen? When after I've been locked up, am I not locked out of opportunity? When is it that I am going to be able to, in effect, be able to retain my own personhood? To Heather's point, people have this scarlet letter on their chest, which, you know, in effect means F. And I think that too often folks get a reentry program that lasts 30 days, but they have a stigma that lasts for 30 years. And what we don't do is we don't give longitudinal support, right? Like, you know, back to what I think that Elisa was, Heather was alluding to, in terms of what happens with people is that we need to have a social contract with folks. Reentry is not a solo mission. And until systems start showing up with the same energy that we expect from people who have been directly impacted by the legal system, from people who have been incarcerated, from people who've never been incarcerated, they've never been locked up, but they're still locked out of those 46,000 social sanctions of a felony conviction, we're not building pathways. We're actually laying traps in calling and programs. Last but not least, I'll also mention this as well. You know, we tell people to get up, to stay clean, to find housing, to pay court fines, support your kids, and do it all while being tracked, while they are being tested, and while they're being blocked at every turn. Meanwhile, the system, it gets to go, it gets to continue to underperform with impunity. I've been wanting to say that word all day long. Impunity. I'm going to say it one more time. It gets to underperform with impunity. And so if a parole officer drops the ball, if housing isn't available, if treatment wait lists are 6 months long, who's held accountable for that? We're putting the onus on the individual, and rightly so, right? I think that there's a degree of responsibility that people have to show up as the better version of themselves. But I think that the accountability should be placed on systems that should be designed in order to be able to support these individuals.
Yeah, I think Lisa wanted to get in. No, you're okay?
I was just dropping the mic.
Well, you know, it reminded me of this old sign that was at a California parole office, trail them, nail them, and jail them. This was like taken like 40 years ago. I know it's not there anymore, but thankfully we still have a way to go, but a change in mindset towards how do we help people succeed, even as obviously there
That
is
was back in the
somewhat.
1800 marks when you were like 3 years old.
Well, I'll shift it back to Khalil. I think we have some questions coming in from the audience.
Yep. Yeah, so we want to get to questions in about another 6 or 7 minutes. So folks, please use the Q&A function to submit questions to us. Again, we want to get to as many questions as possible in the very short period of time that we have left. I do have a question for Lisa, and then I think Marc, you have a question for Heather. So Lisa, what role should prosecutors, victims, formerly incarcerated individuals, and community members play in helping to shape not only reentry policy, but I would also say the implementation of those policies. So what role should prosecutors, victims, formerly incarcerated, and community members play in helping to shape and implement reentry policy?
That's a great question, Khalil. Everyone that you just named has a role. The thing is that those roles are not equal, right? Those that are directly impacted by the justice system should be the ones leading the conversation. And that means that formerly incarcerated people and survivors must be centered in this conversation and not just consulted. At the center, the organization that I founded in honor of my son who lost his life to gun violence 13 years ago, we build our programs alongside people with lived experience because proximity brings wisdom, and policy without wisdom brings harm, and it's hollow, it's empty. Prosecutors also have a role to play, but they should not be the sole decision makers. Their power needs to be balanced by those who've been harmed and those who've been held accountable, so that the reentry policy reflects the full picture of what healing and safety actually require. And then we have the community, and community members are often viewed as bystanders in this work, but they're actually the terrain where real reentry actually happens. Their trust, their support systems, and their willingness to welcome people home and to support them in their reentry process is what determines whether or not reentry actually succeeds. If it doesn't make the entire determination, it does play a very, very large role. And if we want policies that actually work, then they need to be shaped by all of us, but especially those with the lived experience of who have lived the cost of actually getting it wrong. Those are the people that we need to hear from.
Thanks so
Heather,
much.
I wanted to follow up with you on question in terms of what legislation you may be tracking or that you would like to see both at the federal level and at the state level that kind of is relevant to some of what we've been talking about so far.
Yeah, I've got a few I want to mention, Mark. First of all, Safer Supervision Act, bipartisan bill. It's got incredible support, and we're hoping to see it be reintroduced this Congress. It promotes safety, stability, and success by modernizing federal supervision practices. To the point some have made, it's important that those who are doing community supervision have a mindset of helping people succeed, not catching people, right? And so this bill would help do that at the federal level. I also think about the Federal Prison Oversight Act, a bill Prison Fellowship and so many others supported, that did, pass the finish line, was signed into law. But we need House appropriators to push for funding this winter. And so we're going to be continuing to advocate for that. And like I said, reentry, it's not just about the moment someone goes home. We have to be thinking about, are we building the culture and environment in the federal system to the extent we can to be a place where people can achieve change. And so oversight's a piece of that. And then backing up even further, we need to be holding our system accountable for the front end as well. And so, in this conversation, I also think about the Victim Act, Violence Incident Clearance and Technology Investigative Act. We should be making sure that there are resources to victims of violent crimes, to families of homicide victims. And a lot of times, people end up needing a second chance because they didn't get a first chance and they didn't get the support that they needed at the front end. And so, that's a bill that would help do that. So those are some of the federal pieces of legislation we're watching. Certainly, we have a lot going on at the state level as well. And then, lastly, I would just again go back to the point of culture. We need to make sure people are going home to a place where they have belonging, welcome, and support. If you're listening today and you're connected to a church, I'd encourage you to check out prisonfellowship.org. We've been, since starting Second Chance Month in April, asking churches to host a Second Chance Sunday, where we preach on the message of redemption. We share testimonies of people who have experienced a second chance, and really encourage congregations to be a place of welcome. And so we've got a bunch of resources to help congregations do that every April. And so that's another way that we can be part of the solution.
Thanks so much, Heather. We're going to shift now to Q&A, and folks have been populating the Q&A chat pretty heavily. Thank you so much. Please keep the questions going. So we're going to pose questions. If there is one specific question to a specific panelist, we'll pose it to you. If not, the question is open for all panelists to respond to. And we do ask that you keep your responses as short as possible, with touching your points, obviously, as we would like to get through as many questions as we can. So question number one, we talk about using recidivism as a metric. However, have we talked about desistance, which is the process by which individuals cease engaging in criminal behavior and refrain from reoffending over time? And that question is open for anyone.
Well, actually, I'll just add something to it because I think it's really good. When we see the statistics about recidivism, rearrest, some of that, obviously, it's all important, but some of it's technical violations, missing appointments and things like that. And of course, some of it's also someone who might have been incarcerated for something quite serious, and now they've been rearrested for a minor misdemeanor. And yes, it's recidivism and they need to be held accountable, but it can obscure the fact that they may have made substantial progress. And as we know, in terms of things like mental illness and substance use disorder, which often contribute to some of the challenges people have in the criminal justice system, it does take time, and also people can fall back and then make further progress. But yeah, let me turn it over. Heather, Lewis, or Lisa, did you want to address that?
The only thing I would add, Mark, is just, I think it's a fair question. We focus so much on recidivism, and essentially recidivism is a failure rate. We don't measure any other system by their failure rate. You wouldn't choose the hospital you're going to go to based on its death rate, right? And so we ought to be measuring more positive, holistic things as well. Prison fellowship. I see one of the questions in the chat from Director Braun out in North Dakota. We were, privileged to be able to work with his team there at the department to build a prison culture assessment. And so we're trying to measure not only recidivism, which is the key thing people use, but we're trying to think about, what is a measure of success? How and how do we keep accountable not just the individuals in the system, but the people working in the system? And I'm so grateful to Director Braun to open up his staff to be able to comment on the surveys we had, so we can really build out, a sense of the positives and places of opportunity to work on in terms of the culture of not just the people who are incarcerated, but also the people working in the system as well. And, I think that there's a lot more we can do in terms of measuring success, not just failure.
Could one of you also maybe speak to the effect on other people too, in terms of whether it's children of someone who's incarcerated, a spouse, others, and, in terms of when that person comes home, how does what happened to that re-entering individual affect these other people in the community specifically?
I think that's something that doesn't get addressed enough. So thank you, Mark, for that question. The work that we do at the center, working with the reentry community, we get to see that we get to see a lot of that upfront and personal, upfront and personal, but through the eyes of the person who's experienced it. And I don't believe that there's enough knowledge about the impact on families and communities. Growing up with a parent who is incarcerated, the impact of living that experience, traveling back and forth to prisons for visits as a child, and for whatever the duration of that incarceration is. That experience, the lived experience of those who love those who are formerly incarcerated, and how they serve time with the person who with their loved one, and what that looks like for them. There is a retraining of the brain, a retraining of the mind that happens during the incarceral experience, and it doesn't happen just for the person who is actually incarcerated. That happens for the family members and community that love them as well. And I don't think that that's something that gets talked about or addressed in the area of behavioral health and mental health supports. During the reentry process, everyone should be supported, not just the person who was incarcerated, but the people that love that person as well.
Thank you so much, Lisa. We're going to move to the next question if I can. Mark, I'll pose this one, and the next one you can pose. As more states are passing clean slate initiatives with carve-outs to exclude individuals convicted of certain offenses, how do we get people to understand that people for whom these laws are most appropriate are all too often excluded? And anyone can start.
I'm thinking about that question, and I'm thinking about, the contributions to the work that I've done around clean slate. And if we're honest, I think that clean slate laws with carve-outs are like offering second chances with conditions that exclude people who actually need it the most. And we're clearing records for folks who are already halfway through the door, while those most impacted, Khalil, like those who served decades, those who've transformed, and they're left carrying the full weight of their past forevers. And I think that when I'm thinking about like carve outs, redemption should I don't think that redemption should be reserved for the easy cases. I think that if your second chance laws exclude the people who've done the hardest work to change, then it's not reform, it's reputation management, so to speak. And when I think about carve outs for so-called more serious offenders versus non-serious offenders, or violent offenders versus non-violent offenders, like you have to be able to, it dichotomizes, and you have to be able to center transformation, not just through charging types. And so, I've seen this debate. I've seen these carve outs. I know how there are other people who walk away from the passage of a legislation with smiles. And I know that there are other people who walk away from legislation being passed, such as clean slate, with frowns, because they know that they are going to continue to be left out. I mean, in all actuality, carve out is just a euphemism for saying, like, we're leaving these people out. We're going to continue to lock these people out. And I don't think that that's how redemption operates. Again, this is just the faith person who's inside of me, right? Like, grace doesn't have an expiration. Grace doesn't have a metric that it runs out on opportunity. If we're going to say we're going to give people a clean slate, then we need to give them a clean slate all across the board.
Thank you, Louis. Marc?
Yes, well, we have a really interesting question from Colby Braun, who was referenced earlier by Heather as the head of, and I got to visit the really transformative prison fellowship unit there, which also includes a program for Vera Institute with mentors for emerging adults. But he posed a really interesting idea about rating communities for reentry, and it kind of reminded me a few years ago when, in the context of Afghan refugees resettling in the U.S., they were advised to settle. Actually, I'm going to toot my own horn here in Houston and DFW because of the lower cost of living, as well as there being a number of Afghan refugees advised to come to Houston, for example, instead of San Francisco. So anyway, there's a number of factors, obviously, that one has to consider, I think, in addition to cost of living, but also how people will be welcomed. And it's also interesting in the context of, the question of, making sure that people aren't just, I remember when there was once a scandal, this is like, I'm dating myself again, 15 or 20 years ago, but a bedroom community outside of Los Angeles, the people were, homeless people, they took them from there to Skid Row and just dropped them off. So there's this history of sometimes where communities want to dump people they view as problems on other communities, which I think is really troubling. But let me put this question, though, because it's really an interesting one to anyone who would like to answer it. Heather, did you want to start?
Sure. The question about, rating communities, Director Braun got me just thinking about the prison culture assessment that we validated in North Dakota with his team, because it's really based on overarching values, things like affirmation and restoration that we're trying to measure. And those same values, I think, could be applicable to extending the tool in the community. So Director Braun, thanks for the idea. I think we'll have to talk to the team about it. But I think it's really important because to a lot of the discussion we've been having, it's not just about the government actors. It's not just about the individual who committed the crime. It's also about, how are we showing up for people? And just, a small point to illustrate this. One of the things I love to share with other states that I've seen done in North Dakota is they started really trying to focus on positive affirmation to the incarcerated and asking the corrections officials to not just do bad write-ups, but to also do write-ups when people were, engaging in positive behavior, and to mark that. And so the corrections officials in North Dakota started doing this, and what happened is the incarcerated started writing positive write-ups of the corrections officials. Just naturally, they'd be tearing off paper and turning these in, and so it just created this, cascading positive affirmation system. And people are much more motivated. I know my kids are, right? And I am, when I'm hearing, this was really great that you did, versus constantly picking at what's not going well, right? And what if we were also looking at and rating the affirmation that communities are giving to people coming home, rather than just looking at catching people, just looking at the news that comes on that's often so negative. So I think it's a really important point. And a lot of times we focus just on the prison system, but the reality is our prison officials don't decide how long someone's going to come to prison. They don't decide who comes to prison. They can only do the best they can, once people get there. And so at every end of the spectrum, including the community, before and after, we need to be holding people accountable. And I really like this idea of extending measurement to the community.
Yeah, I was just going to add, just as a PS to what Heather said, is that I think that we need, in my mind, like a community opportunity scoreboard, right? Where if you can look at a community and you can see 5 liquor stores, and you can see vape lounges and all of these other things, why can't we have mental health clinics? Why can't we have reentry support clinics? I think that we should be measuring communities by access to housing, healthcare, education, jobs, and we also need to tie that into funding as well, not how many people are policed or prosecuted. And so, I think that a community that needs to be rated should be a community that is going to be setting people up for success and not failure. Let me also say this as well as a PPS. When I came home from federal prison, when I in effect conceptualized and introduced the concept for Connecticut's first government office for reentry affairs. When I presented that to the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut's largest city, it was a laughable notion. But there was a mayor who had been justice impacted. He served 8.5 years in federal prison. He bought into it. And not only were we able, I should say, to replicate that model throughout the state, but we were also able to replicate that model throughout the country. So much so that in 2017, we won an award by the U.S. Conference of Mayors for best reentry practices. The reason why I'm bringing that up is because I did a very unscientific assessment, so to speak, of what the reentry needs were of people who have been justice impacted. I saw that there were too many liquor stores, there were too many other things in the community that, in effect, was bankrupting us as a culture, to use Heather's word, right? Like bankrupting us as a culture and not necessarily making deposits into us so that we can show up as a better version of ourselves.
Thanks, Louis and Heather. We have we have time for a couple more questions. I'll pose one and then Marc, I'll turn it over to you. Everyone coming through the system, and this is from Ann Jacobs out of New York as well. Ann, thank you for joining. Everyone coming through the system is dealing with enormous cumulative trauma that has taken a toll on their nervous system and emotional well-being. This is foundational for them dealing with all the challenges of reentry. What have you all found effective at healing trauma and developing a sense of emotional well-being? Before I turn it over to the speakers, I should just say, like, big shout out to Chicago Beyond, who has done a massive report on this, on not only the impact that trauma has on the incarcerated, but also the impact that trauma has on the people who work within the system, and how that is actually that is probably the most common ground that people who are incarcerated and people who work in the system have, is the fact that they have this shared experience that all too often breeds trauma. So I'll turn it over to the speakers. Anyone can start.
I'll be very brief in saying this, and I just want to share an anecdotal story. It wasn't until recently, probably about a year or so ago, that I stopped taking a shower in my boxers. And for those of you who have done any degree of prison time, you understand what it is that I'm saying. The reason why, and this is being home after 14 years and home approximately 10 years, right? That was still trauma, what I call the new PTSD, prison traumatic stress disorder. And so I can tell you probably at least 2.5 times out of the week to date, I am having some type of dream and or a nightmare that makes Sesame Street, Elm Street, I should say, look like Sesame Street in comparison, because I'm always thinking about the trauma that I experienced when I was incarcerated. And so what I think that is most effective is that we have to have peer-led healing spaces. I think that we have to have therapy with cultural fluency. And I also think that we have to have programs that don't perpetuate or pathologize people.
Pathologize.
Pathologize. Thank you. Pathologize. My grandmother used to teach me that word, but it escaped me. But that pathologizes people. But we don't see their pain as a product of survival, right? I think that we need to see people for who they are, as complex, as sophisticated, as trauma laden as we quite possibly can be. The other thing I'll also mention is this as well. From a solutions perspective, why can't nonprofit organizations partner with organizations such as, whether it's Prison Fellowship, whether it's BetterHelp, whether it's another therapy virtual platform, where they just give free therapy hours for these individuals, for their families, right? A free therapy credit so for their families so that they can actually work through their trauma. You have to consider this, Khalil. When I came home from prison, everybody was telling me to go, 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 right? But then the moment that I stopped, then life caught up to me. Then all of my traumas that I experienced when I was incarcerated caught up to me as well. Also want to mention this as well. Lisa, is I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the trauma that you mentioned in terms of you starting an organization as a result of your son being killed, because I know that you are in a sorority that no woman in life wants to be a part of. And so I want to acknowledge your trauma as well, even though you may not necessarily haven't been incarcerated. I know that your heart is incarcerated due to that loss.
And that's
Thank
a
you
good
so
segue, Lisa. Yeah, go ahead, Lisa. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say thank you, but I also wanted to respond to the actual question. One of the things that we've done at the Darren B. Easterling Center is we've developed, as a result of my time on the Prisoner Review Board in the state of Illinois, and seeing firsthand the failings of the system for those who have served long-term incarceration and failing to address the pre-carceral traumatic experiences that many who find themselves in a position of having caused harm have actually experienced harm prior to their carceral experience. Hurt people. That's that whole mindset. And what we did was we partnered with the University of Illinois at Chicago and Dr. Catherine Bocanegra, who is also a member of the council here, and developed an entire 12-week program that focuses on helping individuals who serve long-term prison sentences to first and foremost understand and then reclaim their identity post-incarceration. It is not peer-led, but peer occupied, if you will. So everyone in the group is someone who is formerly incarcerated, and facilitators come with some sort of connection to the carceral experience. Mine is having my son was killed 7 months after having spent time in prison. He came home. He had a lot of ghosts. He had a lot of ghosts, and I, as his mother, had to live with that. Catherine, as we also know, is married to Eddie Bocanegra, who himself also served time. And so we bring to that our experiences as individuals who've loved people who have served time, and helping support the space for growth and healing for those who have served time as well. That I believe that, because I believe that recidivism was such a major role, a determinant in the state of Illinois in measuring success, if you will, and it doesn't measure success. We needed to create a space for people to actually find themselves and understand what the next phase of their journey could look like, and unpacking all of their trauma before, during, and after incarceration. So thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Marc, over to you.
Well, do we have time for another question, or should we close things out?
I think if we prompt the speakers to be very, very concise in their speaking, yeah, I think we can fit one in before we
Okay.
jump
Well,
off.
this was a really good question here anonymously about how do we get programs to focus on people of the highest risk, highest need versus, sending somebody to classes who's already low risk and just getting in their way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think, that's something that I think can be encouraged with legislation. I know it was part of the First Step Act to make that point and put out that evidence. I would also just say, a lot of programs are set up to address people as close to release as possible. And I think that that's a missed opportunity. Prison Fellowships Academy that I mentioned earlier, we make available to anyone at any point in their sentence. We actually have the average amount of time someone has left on their sentence in the Academy program is 7 years. And we love that, because you know what happens? Those alumni become culture changers in the prison. And so there's this ripple effect that happens. I think it would be, a great thing if more programs opened up their doors to people who were not so close to release, and perhaps have that higher need.
Thanks, Heather. Lisa, Louis, final words?
Amen.
Concise.
That part.
Well, listen, thank you to our esteemed panelists, Heather, Louis, Lisa. Thank you so much for taking your time, for being transparent, and for sharing your not only your experiences, but also the trauma that sometimes comes with those experiences. Please know that that there will be a recording of this that will be up on the CCJ website and CCJ social medias. I'll turn it over to Marc for his final words. Thank you all.
Well, thanks, Khalil. It's been an inspiring discussion, and I'm just reminded by this discussion that this area is not a zero-sum game. We can have accountability, and we can also help people succeed. We also really identified the fact that there's a role for holding systems accountable and improving them and making sure people have access to more opportunities as well. So we're so grateful for our terrific panel and for all of you who joined us. And we look forward to hopefully seeing you at future Council on Criminal Justice and Centering Justice Initiative events.
Thanks, everyone.